All right. Am I recording? I think I am. So I am doing this little video just as a video tutorial for this digital painting project practice that we've been working on these during class this week. So remember that for this project, you are first going to start by doing a painting of a picture of a piece of fruit. We'll then do another painting where you'll have the option to choose between a couple different subjects and photographs that I have pre-selected for you. But I'm just going to be focusing on the first painting, the fruit painting. So when we're starting this out, what we want to do is we want to go ahead and open up Photoshop on our computer. We're going to create a new document. So I'm going to be creating a 11 by 8.5 inch document with a resolution of 150. And again, as far as the name of our documents, we always name it our last name underscore, and then something that you will remember when we go to turn this in. So I'm going to name this Practice Painting Fruit. Again, you can name it whatever you'd like. When I'm done, I'm going to hit Create, and I'll have my document created. So for this first fruit practice painting, I'm going to recommend that we go through and again paint a picture of a cherry. The reason I am suggesting cherries is because they're fairly simple and they are distinct. Again, if we compare something like a cherry to something like a mango, a mango is just a big blob with some different colors, some little speckles. It's hard to make a mango look like a mango if we're trying it out for the first time. Whereas something like a cherry is a little bit more distinct. You have the two, in this case, little cherries. You have the stem, you have the leaf. It'll be a lot easier to tell what this is. So I'm just going to right click and copy the image. I'm going to go back to Photoshop, and I can either press Control V or I can go to Edit, Paste to add the image in. This image was fairly high resolution, so I'm going to go and grab my Move tool. I'm going to zoom out. I'm going to shrink the image down so it's covering roughly about half the screen. Because in the end, when we go to submit this, you're going to have the image and your painting kind of side by side next to each other. So when I go to grade these, I can compare them. So now that we have our image created, you can see here it's on its own layer. What I'm going to do is I'm going to click the little lock button to lock down this layer so I don't accidentally move or select it. I actually also don't want to accidentally draw on top of the layer. Because what I'm going to do now is at the bottom of my layers panel, I'm going to click the little plus button to create a new layer. And I'll be doing all of my drawing and tracing on top of this new layer. So once I have that created, I'll go ahead and grab my brush tool on my toolbar. I can also press B to activate it. And by default, you'll see on the toolbar, there's lots of these tools. We don't need most of these. So one recommendation I do have is before we actually start working, to click Window at the top, hover over Workspace, and then choose Painting. And again, my window up here is going to be a little bit different than yours because I'm on a Mac computer, but all of the options will be the same on these, just look slightly different. And by going in that painting workspace that we just did, we have it set up so we removed all of the unnecessary tools and we only have the tools related to painting. Over on the side of our document here too, we also have access to all of the different brushes, kind of default color swatches that we can use as we're going through and making our paintings. So what I'm going to do is over on the color swatches here, I am just going to go and close that up for now. On the brush panel here, I'm going to grab a hard round brush in the General Brushes tab. I'm going to change the size of the brush down to about 10 pixels, even lower. I'm actually going to put it at about 5. So as we begin to trace over our image here, you can use a black brush if you'd like, but I'm going to recommend to press I to click on the image you are drawing to color sample that color. So as we draw this cherry now, I'm going to be using a dark red brush, which will make it a lot easier to blend these tracings in to our final after. So I'm going to zoom in on the cherry, and again, using this red brush, I'm going to start going through and tracing the image here. And as always too, I'm going to recommend using a drawing tablet when you're tracing these. I find it is infinitely easier and quicker for me, but if you feel comfortable and confident using the mouse, all the power to you. I'd be no issues with using the mouse. I just personally find it to be pretty difficult. As I'm tracing too, I'm making sure as much as possible that I'm tracing accurately, that I'm really taking time and effort into making these tracings proportional so that we're not too big. I'm also going to take some time and effort that once I'm done kind of outlining the basic forms like I'm about to be, that I'm going to go through and start to also outline some of those shadow shapes within the cherries. So I could start drawing and painting in colors right now, but I'm going to take a little bit more time and effort to go through and also highlight some of these shadow shapes. And if I'm ever working too fast on this tutorial, just feel free to pause it, take your time, come back, and resume it when you are ready. But for now, I'm just going to be marking up this page, so it'll be easier for me to know where I'm going to be painting in the light, the dark colors, and everything else around. I'll even do a little circle down here around where the shadow is going to be. And now that I'm done tracing my image, I'm going to press V or click my move tool at the top and then move the tracing over to the side. So I have my original and then my subject kind of back to back right next to each other. Now, when you begin to color in your lines, you can color directly over top your tracing, but what I'm going to recommend too is, again, I'm going to lock this tracing layer. I'm going to create a new layer above this so that as I begin to paint in the colors on this cherry here, if I make mistakes, I can press E to grab my eraser tool. I can erase those mistakes, but I won't accidentally erase any of these background tracings. So I'll press B now. And if I want to start grabbing colors from this image, I can use the eyedropper tool like we've done before. I can press I can click on an area to sample that color. I can press B, and I can go and use my brush tool to paint that color in. But as I'm sampling these colors, I'm going to go back and forth constantly. Because again, if we look at this cherry right here, if I zoom in to say this highlighted area, right? If I sample one area of it and I paint it in versus another area of it and I paint it in versus another area of it and I paint it in, you can see that within this whole highlighted area are multiple different colors. So the more you go back and forth and actually grab these different colors and paint them in where you see it, the more accurate your final painting is going to be. Because in real life, we have lots of wide ranges of different hues, even within single objects like this cherry. There is a definite color, I would say, to this cherry. It's kind of this dark, deep red. But depending where the shadows are, depending where the highlights are, where it's being illuminated in, even just the picture in the background can all influence the different shades and tones that we see within. So again, I'm constantly kind of going back and forth as I grab different colors, paint them in different areas. And while I'm painting, there might be cases where I want to change the size of my cursor. In that case, like I said, I highly recommend kind of at all times keeping your fingers on the I, B, and bracket keys. Now the bracket keys are the ones next to P on your keyboard. Again, if we imagine that we have the key P, and then to the left or right of it is the left bracket, to the right of that is the right bracket key. When you press the left bracket key, what it's going to do is make your lines thinner, and when you press the right bracket key, it'll make your lines thicker. So you don't have to constantly go to this menu every time you want to change the size of your brush. You can just quickly use that bracket key to go and resize the brush as you're painting different areas of it. So I'm going to speed up a little bit through this for the sake of time. Again, if you want to and you're ready to move on to the next part, you can just skip ahead a couple minutes in this video. But I do encourage you as much as possible to really take your time in getting these as nice and accurate to real life as you can. So again, we're not just sampling one or two parts of the image. We're really going through, and when I'm done painting that stalk or the stem on this cherry, I might grab a different green and add a little bit of that. I might go down to the bottom and grab some of this dark green where the stem connects to the cherry. Because even just within something like this cherry stem, we might look at it, we might think to ourselves, yeah, it's just green. But we also have to keep thinking to ourselves is what kinds of greens are within there? What kinds of greens are we seeing on our document? So again, I'm not just seeing one green, but I'm seeing dark greens, I'm seeing light greens. I'm even seeing some areas that are maybe more towards a yellow, or a brown even too. And you don't have to get like all the colors in right away. Again, this process that we're doing right now is just called blocking in colors. So I'm getting a variety down, but I will go later after I'm done blocking in the colors, I'll blend them together, and I might go and add more colors and block them in. But when I'm doing this, I'm not too worried about all of the little details, right? If I'm painting this leaf, for instance, right now, I'm not going to worry too much about, the veins on the leaf, the little ribs on there. I'm just going to start grabbing the big colors, blocking them in when I see them. And one thing that might help as you do this is to squint every now and then. By squinting, what happens is the areas that are a little bit darker tend to look a little bit darker, and the areas that are a little bit lighter tend to look a little bit lighter. So it makes it a little bit easier to see where some of these colors might be in the object that you're painting. So for example, if I'm looking at this cherry down here, when I squint, I can see that this whole area kind of formed by this dark red right here is almost in like this, sideways hat shape. And it makes it really easy for me to go and kind of block that general shape over here. So only have a little bit to go. I'll probably go a little bit quicker on this cherry on the left-hand side, again for the sake of time. But that's where really quickly changing the size of our brush can help too. So I can really quickly fill up some of these areas. But even then, I'm not just stopping with one big color. I'm still going to go through and grab some varieties to spice it up a little bit. And looks like I'm pretty much almost done. So I'm just going to fill out the rest of this. And now that we are finished with blocking in those colors, the next step is we want to go and start to blend some of those colors together. So again, when we look at the actual cherry, you can see here that in this dark, deep shadow area, it doesn't just go from shadow to light all of a sudden. It gradually goes from a deep, dark red to a kind of slightly middle value to a lighter and almost this kind of grayish white color on the side. And that's what I'm trying to capture when I'm blocking it in. But I also want to go through and make that a little bit more gradual and natural. So to blend colors in, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go and grab my mixer brush tool, which is a few brushes underneath the regular brush. If I go and reset my workspace to look like the regular version of Photoshop, you might not see the mixer brush. All you have to do is right click on the brush tool and you'll have the mixer brush underneath. But by going in that painting workspace, it just makes it a lot easier to go and click on that. Now with the mixer brush activated, at the top of your screen, right next to where it says custom up here, there's going to be two buttons. You want to make sure that the left button is unclicked, so it's not dark and highlighted right there, and that the right option is clicked, so it is dark and highlighted. This will ensure that whenever you're going and mixing colors, that you're not muddying the colors up, that you're only mixing the colors you have blocked in. And now with this brush, I can go, as you see, I kind of draw on the edge between two colors, and kind of scribble my brush around. It's going to act like paint would in real life, wet paint, and begin to kind of mix together. Now, how much it mixes is determined up here at the top. So where it says custom, if you click this, you have different options. So for example, if I do a wet heavy mix, if I take these strokes and like really streak them along, they're going to go on forever and mix a lot. Whereas if I do, say, a moist mix and I do that, they're not going to mix nearly as much, right? If I'm taking my brush stroke and stretching it off, they're not going to go nearly as far. So I prefer to usually keep it on the moist settings. I know, I'm sorry if you don't like that word. I know it's a triggering word for a lot of people, but I do find that it tends to work the best, or the wet versions. I usually don't go too crazy with the very wet options, even though I like the light mix ones too, because I don't want these getting too nasty and blurry. And again, you don't want to go overboard with your mixer brush here. We're just trying to mix those colors a little bit more gradually. I might even throw it to the moist light mix option. We're just trying to go and gradually start to blend some of these areas of color in with the areas next to them. Now there might be a case where you mix a little bit too much. You might need to go back to your regular brush tool and start to add some new colors into it. Oops, sorry, that's the lunch bell right there. So just kind of go gradually, mix this stuff up. Again, sometimes I like to just swirl these colors in. It was also good to still have your original up there with it too. So you can go and compare and how they're looking. Now again, you might be saying, Mr. Dinh, this is looking a bit crazy right now. I know, but that's because I want like a good base coat that I can still go and paint some more details and everything on top of. So I'm gonna give some of these colors in the leaves a quick blend. I'm gonna do the same thing with some of the colors in the stalk. I might hide my tracing layer. Hey, Wilson, you're not interrupting. I'm just doing a little video demo. Just so I can see what it looks like without those traced in lines. Because we want to hide those eventually. Like I said, we're making a tracing, we're not making a drawing. Or painting, sorry, not a drawing. So now that I have everything blended in, if we zoom out, we can see they're getting pretty close to another. We have a lot of the same colors. Those colors are blended together. But there are still lots of details that we wouldn't blend normally. So for example, these veins on this leaf here, that's not something we would normally probably blend because they're very defined lines. So in this case, I might go back to my regular brush tool. I might color sample some of those lines right there. Go back. And as you're painting in too, I encourage you to experiment with different brushes. So at the very top of your screen, if I open up the brush selector, normally all these little tabs are going to be closed, but you can click these little arrows to open them up. And I encourage you to experiment. So for example, I really like some of these dry media brushes, specifically like the pastel brush, just because it has a little bit more texture and it makes the drawings you do a little bit more visually interesting. So I might go with this a little bit, and you can see here it's not like a perfectly smooth line. It has like some streakiness to it. I really like that, and I'm going to go and add some of these little kind of vein shapes for the leaf right here. If I see too, they're not just bright lights. If I observe the actual image itself, there's also kind of these dark shadows under them. So I might grab a slightly darker green and also kind of go along those cherries too. Add some little darker shadows.
Hey.
Hello. Don't mind me if I'm talking to myself. I'm still filming a little video demo. And it's also good to still go and add texture within the actual painting itself. So if we go back to the brush settings, I really like these special effect brushes down at the bottom. So I like the splatter brushes, for instance, like this cherry right here. We see all of these like little dots on the cherry, these little bright dots. So I might go sample some of those little bright red colors. And when I use this splatter brush, if I click, it's going to add some random little splatters, essentially random little dots. If I click with this on the actual image of the cherry, I can fill it up with some little splatter dots. If I zoom out, you can see that those little dots are just adding some more of that texture that we see in the real image. I might do the same thing too. I might go and add maybe some really dark dots too to balance it out a little bit more. And again, just don't be afraid to experiment with any of these brushes. Other brushes I like are the screen tones. This is for my anime heads out there. When you use a screen tone brush, it's going to paint with these little dots, right? So this is also a good way to add some of that texture to it. You see here, if I go and paint some of these dark shadows with this screen tone, I'm getting this really cool effect. I'm making the painting itself a little bit more expressive. I really love these for shading and highlighting, so I might go and add some screen tone highlights into the mix here. And it does become personal preference. There are a million different ways that you can paint these objects, a million different brushes. You can even find and download brushes on the internet too to get some more interesting textures. But by mixing up smooth brushes, more textural brushes, having blended and unblended lines, we can get a lot more variety to our painting than if we just stick with normal stuff. There's even some textural blending brushes. So for example, this Impressionist blender brush, when you use it and we paint, is also a good way to add a little bit of texture kind of in between some of these colors too. So again, when we zoom out, we can see that if I kind of compare how it was before I started adding some of that texture in to how it is after I started adding some of that texture in, just by mixing up the brush strokes that we use, we can create a lot of visual interest and variety. I am recording a video tutorial because I promised some of my students at home I would do that, and I'm over with it now. So this is the part where I say I'm done with it and I don't know how to end these.
I thought.
I don't know.
I was talking and I was like, I thought you were talking to somebody, and then I was like, well, maybe he's on the phone. And then I was like, no.
I'm not. Anyways, that's the end. Ask me if you have any questions. I don't know how to stop this recording.